In this video, we are taking a look at 5 different 83mm burrs and talking about how they compare to each other. That's really good. As we all know, coffee is a highly subjective thing. Each person's experiences or thoughts on specific coffee things, whether that's pieces of gear, coffees, different brewing methods, whatever the case may be, is going to vary depending on their palate and their flavor preferences or the flavor profiles, and coffees that they like to brew. So there is no right or wrong when it comes to coffee. There's just what you like, and the most important thing is that you have pieces of gear that accentuate or highlight the characteristics or flavor profiles of the coffees that you like to drink. My goal with this video is to test all these burrs, compare the burrs I had on hand, and share that information with you after I compiled some data and spent several days, testing these burrs, to put this information out there. That way, if any of you are in the market for any of these 83mm burrs, it may help you to narrow down, which burr would work better for your particular taste preferences and the types of coffees that you like to drink. In the interest of full transparency, Espresso Outlet did send me the 2 sets of SSP burrs that I have here that I'm testing amongst these other burrs. I do have to send them back. I don't even get to keep them. There was no stipulation for any sort of content that had to be made. They're not paying me to make this video, and they don't have any say in what I say in this video. Before we dive in and start talking about my experience and my tests with these burrs, I do want to say none of these burrs are bad. They all just do a different job and present coffees differently. So the goal is to align what you like and your personal taste preferences with the burr that's going to give you the flavor profile or present the coffees that you like to drink in a more pleasing way for your palate. If you watch my videos, then you probably saw my review of the Turin DF83V, but unfortunately I was unable to get my hands on a second DF83V, so I used 2 DF83 Gen 2s to make sure that the grinders were identical for this test. The DF83V has a pre-breaker, whereas the DF83 Gen 1 and Gen 2 do not, and so I didn't want there to be a big variable and difference between the grinders that these burrs are in that could potentially impact the flavor profile of those burrs because of additional components that one grinder has over the other. Over the course of several days, I compared these burrs on both filter and espresso, and I took a lot of notes to be able to give you guys, hopefully, some good information. For the filter test, I brewed a very standard 15-gram 1:16 ratio V60, utilizing the same recipe every time. I dialed in each one of the coffees to get the same extraction percentage, give or take a very small margin. I used the same wash process Kenya coffee, the same water recipe, and same water temperature for all of the brews. For the espresso test, I used the same black honey process Costa Rica coffee. I used the same dose of 18 grams, did the same puck prep, used the same portafilter and basket, used the same water temperature, and roughly got all the shots dialed into pretty close to the same shot time, but more importantly, I got them all dialed into a very close extraction percentage, give or take, again, a small margin. So I got my laptop here with all of my notes and data and thoughts that I've compiled on these particular burrs, so let's dive in and start talking about them. The burrs that I use for this test and comparison are the Turin standard burrs that you find in the DF83 Gen 1 and Gen 2, the Turin DLC espresso and brew burrs that you find in the DF83V, and the SSP multi-purpose and high uniformity burrs. The rundown of these burrs is in no particular order. It's just, the order they were in when I was testing them and how I charted them and plotted them and made my notes about them. Let's see here. What did I write? So first up, let's talk about the standard Turin 83mm burrs, again, which you find in the DF83 Gen 1 and Gen 2. These are uncoated stainless steel burrs, and they are sort of a all-around burr designed to be used for espresso and for filter brewing. To me, especially in comparison with the other burrs in this test, they're a little lackluster. I like to drink, and I'm assuming probably a good majority of you out there like to drink more modern light roasted coffees. And these burrs kind of leave a little bit on the table. They leave a little bit to be desired with those types of coffees. You can still get a decent, reasonably tasty cup of coffee with them. However, they don't really accentuate or highlight some of the, more vibrant, acidic, juicy characteristics, and they definitely don't have the clarity you would want with more modern light roasted coffees. For me, these burrs are very kind of middle of the road, although they do have nice body and good texture, but the clarity, the acidity, and the sweetness is all just sort of right in the middle and sort of muted tasting, if you will. To me, it was a very sort of rounded flavor profile where the clarity, acidity, and sweetness all sort of occupy kind of the same space. All the flavors are, very intermingled with not really one particular flavor really standing out above the rest. Maybe just a slight good enough amount of clarity with some lighter roast to get some of the fruitier notes through, but as a whole, just a very round flavor with a little bit bigger body and texture, and just, again, sort of kind of very flat across the board. So for filter brews, if you like a more rounded sort of combined flavor profile with good body, let's say you're somebody that drinks maybe more medium and darker roasted coffees, then I think these burrs would probably suit you just fine for filter. For espresso, they were basically the same with maybe a small bump in the sweetness, but they did have nice texture and good body. Again, they were just lacking sort of that vibrancy, the clarity, the nice acidity that you would get with a lighter roasted coffee that you'd probably really want to accentuate if you're someone who enjoys those types of coffees. But on a more medium or darker roasted coffee, they make a very nice, very kind of traditional style, nice, bigger body, textured shot that's great for milk drinks. So if you're somebody that, wants that from your espressos, then I think these are a really good burr for you when it comes to that. So next up, let's talk about the Turin DLC brew burrs. And these are burrs that you would find as a standard option in the DF83V. Again, you can also get the DLC espresso burrs as a standard option in the DF83V, or you can buy the DF83V in a package with both burrs for a little bit more money. So it's just going to depend on what you primarily would want to use that grinder for. But you can also buy these burrs, I think you can also buy these burrs separately. You would have to talk to the people at Espresso Outlet for that, or go to their website. I think you can buy these burrs separately and use them in a grinder like the DF83 Gen 1 or Gen 2. These burrs are really nicely machined, and they have a DLC or diamond-like carbon coating, which is just a coating, if you're unfamiliar with burr coatings, that's going to help reduce friction and increase the lifespan or longevity of the burr. These are surprisingly nice burrs for the money. I've been overall really impressed with these burrs. They have surprisingly great clarity, acidity, and sweetness. A little bit on the thinner, body side, which is sort of, comes with the territory with burrs that are a little more filter focused to sort of peak up the clarity and acidity. You'd have a tendency to typically lose a little bit of body with burrs like those, but overall, the body isn't bad, and the level of clarity, acidity, and sweetness you get from these burrs is surprisingly good. If you're familiar with the SSP MP burrs, and if you're not, don't worry, we're going to talk about those in a minute. These burrs are very similar to the SSP MP burrs, just not quite as intense. They're basically, I would say they're like a turned down version of the SSP MP. So for filter brewing, these burrs do a nice job of highlighting or presenting the really vibrant, clear, acidic, and sweet, notes of particular coffees, especially, again, more modern light roasted coffees. But again, they're just lacking a little bit on the body side. But they're not as thin of a body as you would get with the SSP MPs. I would say they're just slightly more body or texture than the MPs. Unfortunately, one of the downfalls with this burr is you really cannot pull like a standard style shot of espresso with them. If you're into turbo shots, these pull a pretty decently tasty turbo shot, but they do not go fine enough to pull even remotely close to a standard style shot of espresso. So that is one downfall with these burrs versus something like the multi-purpose or MP burrs from SSP, where those do go fine enough. If you're somebody who wants those sort of flavor characteristics and wants a little bit more affordable burr than the SSP multi-purpose, and doesn't necessarily care about that on espresso, then these are a great option of a burr for you. I would be more than happy to have these in a grinder on a daily basis for filter brewing. But again, if you're somebody that wants espresso, these may not be the burr for you. So next up is the last of the Turin burrs. This is the DLC espresso burr. These are the burrs that would be, again, another optional burr for the DF83V when you order it, or potentially bought separately. They have the same build quality, machining characteristics, and diamond-like carbon coating that the brew burrs we just talked about have, except, as you can tell by the burr geometry, these ones are geared more for espresso. However, you can do filter with them with decent results. When it comes to filter brewing with these burrs, they're not bad. They are very sort of similar to the Turin standard burr, just turned up a little bit. The clarity, acidity, and sweetness is all sort of bumped up a little bit, with maybe clarity kind of edging up a little bit more. But the body is less than what you would find in the Turin standard burr. These do a much better job of presenting the more unique, vibrant flavor characteristics of modern light roasted coffees than the standard burrs do on filter. But again, they're still just sort of muted, and a lot of the flavors kind of live in a similar zone with, again, maybe a slight bump in clarity where you could kind of pick out some flavors. So they are better. And if you were going to have these burrs in, just wanted to have one grinder that could do espresso and filter, and these are in your budget, then this is a great option for a burr to have on hand for both. Again, they're not going to give you super extreme clarity or acidity when it comes to filter brewing, but they are going to give you a little bit more body, not as much as the standard burr, but more than the brew burr. But they're going to be turned down when it comes to clarity, acidity, and sweetness versus the brew burr, but the clarity, acidity, and sweetness is going to be bumped up when it comes to the standard burr. So it's kind of like lives right in the middle between those two burrs. I really did enjoy these burrs on espresso. They have kind of yet again another bump in clarity and acidity and sweetness over the filter profile of these burrs, and the texture and body sort of bumps up a little bit with espresso, which is kind of to be expected, but it more resembled the body or texture you'd get with the standard burrs, which is a little bit bigger. So there are some good characteristics of this burr when it comes to espresso for both lighter roasted stuff, bringing out some of those vibrant flavors and a little bit more clarity and acidity, but not really overwhelming, but can be also good for medium to darker roasted coffees to give you kind of more of those traditional style shots. I think these are a really good sort of middle ground burr for somebody who likes milk-based espresso drinks or likes a little bit more traditional sort of brews with a little bit more body, but also likes to dip into lighter roasted stuff and is starting to get used to the more vibrant acidic characteristics of some of the lighter more modern lighter roasted coffees. Now let's move on and talk about the SSP burrs and how they stack up. The SSP multipurpose or MP burr are very nicely machined. They have a coating as well. It's a red speed coating, which is a proprietary SSP coating. Just like the Diamond Light carbon coating, it is a anti-friction, friction reduction coating, and designed to help also increase the longevity of the burrs. These burrs produce a very uniform particle size in a wider range and are famous for presenting a punch in the face of clarity, acidity, vibrancy, and sweetness in your coffees. However, it's at the sacrifice of body. These burrs are notorious for highlighting the good, the exceptional characteristics of your coffees, but they are also known for highlighting the bad in your coffees. So a burr like this, it becomes more imperative that you're using really, really good, high quality, well roasted coffees, because these burrs are going to show more of the imperfections. They're not going to hide as much, of those imperfect flavors versus some of the other burrs we've talked about that have a little bit more of a round flavor profile or structure. These are going to be all in your face, clarity, vibrancy, acidity. You're going to be able to really discern and pick out, separated flavor notes. And sometimes if those flavor notes are not good, you're going to taste them. So just be forewarned that that is a common characteristic of the multipurpose burr. I noticed it more in the 64 millimeter version of these burrs. They seem to be less forgiving and have a narrower range of sort of dialing in specific coffees. The 83 millimeter version of these burrs, I've been really actually pretty impressed with. They seem to be a little bit more forgiving. I did some testing where I got a coffee dialed in, what I thought was the optimal grind size, and I was loving the way that cup of coffee was tasting. And I would swing the grind coarser or finer until I started to get to a point where I felt like I was introducing less desirable flavors or losing some of the desirable flavors that were already there. And I felt like I had a wider range to play with than I was expecting versus my experience with the 64 millimeter MP burrs. On espresso, these burrs present in the exact same way. In your face vibrancy, acidity, great sweetness, but again, lacking and having that thinner body. If you're primarily a modern light roast drinker and you really enjoy those flavor profiles and you want the absolute most, clarity, vibrancy, acidity, intensity of flavors, you want to be able to discern and pick out those separated flavor notes. You want good sweetness and the lack of body doesn't bother you, or maybe you even prefer the more tea-like bodies and some of the more delicate coffees, then these burrs are absolutely for you, and you probably already knew that. I really, really like these burrs. I just wish they had a little bit more body. Now, to mitigate that, you can do immersion brews. You could do full immersion brews, or you could do some hybrid immersion brewing using something like the Pulsar or the Switch or the Sworks brewer, and maybe get a little bit of that body back. You might sacrifice a little bit of the vibrancy or clarity, but depending on the coffee, that may not necessarily be a bad thing. So there are some ways to sort of brew differently with some of these burrs and get different results, of course. But I feel like, again, you're somebody that just wants that smack in the face of vibrancy, acidity, clarity, sweetness, and the body being thin doesn't bother you, then these are absolutely 100% the burrs for you. And finally, the SSP high uniformity or HU burrs. These burrs again have the same red speed coating and great build quality, machining quality that the SSP burrs have, but they produce a much more uniform grind size at finer grind settings, which makes them more ideal for espresso. I found these burrs to produce fantastic clarity, acidity, and sweetness, but still had decent body. I feel like these are kind of like a more modernized version of a traditional espresso burr with the vibrancy, the clarity, the acidity, and the sweetness sort of turned up a little bit. Not again as much as the MP burrs, but turned up a good amount, but still retaining a decent amount of body. These burrs perform really well for a wider range of roast profiles versus something like the SSP MP, and I really, really enjoy these burrs on espresso. For filter brewing, these burrs are decent. I'd say they fall somewhere between the DLC espresso and DLC brew burrs when it comes to those vibrant, flavor characteristics with clarity and acidity and sweetness, but they have more noticeable body, of course, than the brew burrs do. For me, these burrs are a fantastic choice if you're primarily a light roast drinker. You primarily are doing espresso with those lighter roasts and occasionally do some filter brewing or even 50-50. Just know that you're not going to get the level of clarity and acidity comparatively in the filter brews with the HU burrs as you will in the espresso cup, and you're not going to get as close to the clarity and acidity in the filter brews as you will to the MPs, but you will get close to the clarity, acidity, and vibrancy in the cup with espresso as you will with the MPs, but not quite as cranked up, so it doesn't quite slap you in the face as much, but you do get a little bit more body with them. So for me, this is a really, really great espresso burr. I really like these burrs on espresso because again, they offer that clarity and acidity and vibrancy for lighter roasted stuff, but it doesn't quite hit you in the face as much as the MPs do, and you get a little bit more body with them. So I think you have a little bit more flexibility with the HU burr versus the MP burr on espresso. Especially, again, if you're somebody that drinks lighter roasted stuff, but does also like traditional espressos and are going to be doing some medium roasted stuff here occasionally and want to do those milk-based drinks, I think the HUs also perform really well for that and a wider range of roast profiles. For me, if I was to have these burrs, I would probably only use these burrs for espresso, for lighter roasted stuff, and occasionally a little bit more medium roasted stuff for milk-based drinks. But I think that these burrs are a really good middle ground if you find yourself sort of falling into that category. Again, coffee is highly subjective, and the most important thing at the end of the day is that you're getting cups of coffees that you like, that align with your flavor profiles, your palate, and is what you want to drink. I hope my test results give you a good idea or an indication of how these burrs may work in your environment for the types of coffees that you like to drink. I tried to control the scenarios as much as humanly possible, keep the variables to an absolute minimum, get the extraction percentages as close as possible, utilizing, again, the same coffees, the same water temperatures, the same brewers, the same filters, all those sorts of things, keeping them as identical as I possibly could to get you the best results I could and get you the best data and myself the best data that I could to make better educated decisions about these particular 5 burrs. Obviously, I know there are more 83 millimeter burrs out there, and I would like to start doing more of these types of tests and integrating more, different burrs and burr sizes to be able to talk through these things and better understand for myself, and hopefully put this information out there for you to make better educated decisions on what you want to spend your money on that better suits you and your coffee preferences. Please leave a comment and share with us any experiences you may have had with any of these particular burrs. I'd love to hear your take on them. Thanks for watching, take care, and we'll see you in the next video.